Good morning. So that's why you invited me here this year. I thought it was for the parties in the bar, which we had some last night. Saw some of you in the bar last night. We'll see some of you this evening in the bar probably, I hope. And I even saw someone drinking British wine last night. It was a big surprise. There's such a thing? Yeah, I thought this was a no wine zone actually here in Britain, but I guess that's not true. Wow, it's great to be here and talking about something that I'm passionate about. I think Dan, Dave, everyone here is passionate about, which is how we can make the world a better place. Even incidents of the last week or two tell us that the world needs to be a better place. And those of us who have been involved in this for many years, and those of you who are just joining this journey recently, I think you know. I think you feel that this is a way of approaching approaching the world that indeed makes it a better place. It makes it better for everyone involved. I firmly believe that. If that's naive, then I'm naive. That's okay. So I had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago to present at a conference. It's wonderful to see what's happened with the global lean movement. Dan, you and Jim kicked off something pretty amazing 25 years ago. Now we have lean startup, lean UX. We have lean product and process development exchange. Peter is here. And there's something called lean construction. There's a lean construction institute, some of you may know. And Paul ONeill spoke at that on the same stage a couple of weeks ago. And I thought I would begin, I decided that I would try to start beginning my talks just always quoting his opening line. Paul ONeill was the CEO leader of an amazing change at Alcoa a few years ago, and I'm going to reference that in a few moments. But he said, very simply, I want to communicate a few ideas in a clear way that might be helpful to you. I think that's a nice kind of a humble ambition, so that's what I'll try to do. So first of all, I don't have to say much about this, but it is always worth, I think, referring back. So it is the 25th year. I think about a month ago, actually, 25 years and 1 month since the book, The Lean Machine That Changed the World, was published. Thank you for that, Dan. I'd like to ask just briefly, we have a couple hundred people here in the room. How many people have read this book? How many people have not read this book? That was just to make sure you're listening. Oh, okay, so it was about 60% have not, or maybe 55-45. So that's because this is a captive audience of kind of converts, so it's a high percentage. A few years ago, the percentage that had read that book in a gathering like this would have been 90%, and now it's often more like 10%. In fact, I asked that at the Lean Construction Institute, and in a room, a pretty large room, only 2 or 3 hands went up. That's okay. These are ideas that kick things off, and now we're trying to take these ideas further to make them real, to change the world. But it came about through this MIT study, of course, that Dan and others did. And what they were talking about was essentially the Toyota production and management system. So what did they find, at least on the manufacturing side of things? Something I thought I would talk about a little bit more this morning, because it's what keeps me awake at night nowadays, 30 some odd years later, because wonderful things happened 30 years ago. And there are a lot of lessons that have been learned from it. I think there are more lessons that we can learn. So this, Dan, I think captures some of the important data that you had. You didn't actually refer to Toyota in the book, I don't think, but this was there, however implicit or explicit. But there was a comparison of General Motors, one of their factories in the United States, with Toyota. And then along the way, there was a comparison then of NUMMI, the New United Motor Manufacturing, Inc., a joint venture between those two companies, Toyota and General Motors. And some of the data, this is factory stuff. Actually, a lean enterprise is more than production alone. It's product development, it's sales and marketing. It's how you manage the extended entire enterprise. But what they found was assembly hours per car, 31 versus 16, so about double. Productivity, you could call that, about double. And then assembly defects per car, roughly triple, so that's quality. Let's call that quality. And then inventory from 2 weeks to 2 hours, just a mass, I don't know even what number to put on that, just a massive difference there. And then if you go to the joint venture, you see the productivity roughly equal to Toyota, very close. You see the assembly defects, the quality precisely equal to Toyota. That's pretty interesting. And then you see the inventory somewhere in between. So this is, again, part of the original discoveries that were kicking all this off. Let's explore a little bit about that more, because I think there are a few lessons we can take from that. You'll see me, that's me, standing in front of a building with a big sign that says NUMMI, New United Motor Manufacturing, Inc. I think many of you know that story. But I think lean transformations, there's a personal side and an organizational side, and we should not forget either. In a way, the real essence is the personal journey that we all go through. Today's topic is kind of more the organizational side, but we never want to forget it. It is do-it-yourself. It's do-it-yourself not just as a company, but as a person. It does entail a personal journey, a personal change. For me, as it says there, New United Motor built its first car December 1984, its last in April 2010. I happened to have been there on both occasions. This photo was taken during the week of the last production there at NUMMI. And the stories there are ones that I think can be instructive for us even today. One reason being, the factory where this took place was the worst factory in the world. This is an old newspaper article from 1984, 1983. I was there. You'll see the same building as I showed a moment ago, but now on the side it says General Motors Corporation. It was an old GM plant reborn with NUMMI startup. NUMMI was supposed to sound like a new me. We're going to have a new me as a company, as a factory, as individuals. That was the intent. Worst factory in the world. And how can we make that statement? There were actually certifying bodies. It was a certified worst factory in the world. So the first certifying body was General Motors. General Motors at that time had, any old General Motors friends in the audience will know that I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I have a lot of friends who've done a lot of great work at General Motors over the years, but at this point in time especially, they truly had just horrendous quality. You would not buy a General Motors product without waiting until after the launch, 6 months, to make sure they'd worked out the bugs. And even after that, there were a lot of bugs. I mean, it was just really a bad time. So what that is important is to say that to be General Motors' worst was really saying something. You had to try to be the worst, almost. In fact, they did try to be the worst, because the other certifying body was the union. The union itself said, this workforce is so bad, even we can't talk to them. This workforce is the worst that we have in our entire system. So they would, in fact, intentionally try to be the worst. They would sabotage quality. We all know that from an operating standpoint, lean begins with building quality in at every step. Every person, every process, building quality in. This workforce would intentionally sabotage quality. They would do things like loosen tie rods just before the vehicle would leave the plant. There's a famous story actually about that happening, where they found 200 vehicles all in a row with a loosened tie rod. So the bolt was so loose it was about to fall off. So with some driving within a few miles, it would probably fall off. And they found out that a worker had done that intentionally. This is a plant where they would sometimes put the Coca-Cola bottles inside the door panels. This was a plant where they would put a little sand in the gas tank sometimes if they were having a bad day. That was the workforce, the worst workforce in the world. Now, this is when General Motors had just spent 50 years, at least, as the world's largest industrial corporation and the world's most successful. So it's an astounding thing to find this organization that was in this situation. And the worst workforce certified by both General Motors and the union, and there they are. The worst people. The worst people. The union would tell you that. General Motors would tell you that. In fact, General Motors did tell me that. I'm in that photograph somewhere. And I had General Motors friends who would say, watch out for this person and that person. I could show you some of them in the photograph I want. They would say, you can't work with this person. This is, there were some names there who shut us down in 1977 for 6 weeks. They're just horrible people. They'll never learn this. They'll never do this. They'll never try to take this operation where it needs to be. The worst people. Well, with almost the exact same people, only a small number of people from the old General Motors operation were not offered their jobs back. And the ones who weren't, it's not because they were troublemakers. We worked right alongside the troublemakers. And here's another newspaper or a newsletter article from 1 year later, where it didn't just get better on one dimension or another. This is when the results coming out of the plant, the outcomes of the ones from that previous slide I showed, of productivity being almost equal to Toyota in Japan, and quality being absolutely equal. And it set a record for the very best quality score any GM plant had ever gotten. This is the point in time when General Motors had just spent half a century as the most successful, the largest, most powerful industrial organization in the world. And after the very first audit, it set a record for the best quality score ever. Pretty astounding, with the exact same people. So whenever someone tells you, oh, our people just aren't, they don't have the same discipline, I wish we had different people, I'm going to get rid of this person and plug in another one, just remember, and I always do, remember that these were the same people, the horrible workforce, the ones that we were told that would never be able to do this. These were the ones who then, after this change, wanted to go to work with great pride and wanted to build in the best possible quality. And this change from worst to best is certified by General Motors, first of all, who found that it set a record for the best quality score ever, certified by a third party, MIT, Dan Jones and others, and certified by the union itself. This little newspaper is called Solidarity. That is the union newsletter, where they say the members like the changes at GM Toyota's new venture and want the good feelings to last. So an astounding turnaround, just top to bottom. Amazing lessons there, and this was 30 some odd years ago. So back to this, what is lean then? We took a lot of tools and techniques we learned from NUMMI, we learned from other companies, all the examples that Dan talked about. Ultimately, lean is an approach to achieving purpose. What is your purpose? What is our mission? Why are we here? And then solving problems that get in our way, obstacles between us being here and the objective, the purpose that we have, the reason we're here at work, the reason we're doing everything every day. And at every level of the organization, not just frontline workers, a CEO, all the way down through the middle. It does not mean simple downsizing, cost cutting. Lean, Dan, you could have called it learn, I think. You drop a little R in there probably. It's the real essence of the real learning organization, not as a soft thing, but as a very practical and real thing. And so we want to make these improvements, but also sustain those. If we're not doing it in a sustainable way so it continues, then we've missed the boat somewhere. We've done something wrong. And here's an example and a reason why sometimes I still lay awake. This is a newspaper article again. This one from, I think this is 2006. So you can see, I don't know if you can see it there. Oh, you can't see it very well, but that is, I don't know if you know Kid Rock, but he's a Detroit icon, and Pamela Anderson. I don't know if you know Pamela Anderson. But that's a photo of them there to kind of place it in time. In 2006, but the headline, GM, the turnaround is working. This is 30 years after the NUMMI joint venture, when they had been working and learning from NUMMI for all these decades, so it was great. So it was very gratifying. The turnaround is working. But you and I, we all know what happened about 2 years after that, which is the company went bankrupt. So were they learning? Well, perhaps not. So was the turnaround successful? Well, no. So this is the challenge that we all face. And so there's wonderful lean stuff. So I just gave you the story of NUMMI, all the great, wonderful improvements. You know other stories like that. They're all over. I mentioned Alcoa a little bit later. Dan mentioned several. We know countless numbers of such improvement stories. The thing is, how can we learn to think and act that way more of the time, as organizations, as individuals? This becomes, I think, our challenge. So in the recent years, as we try to think of what's a framework for us to understand that, we've thought in terms of process, people, and purpose. And if we align those to create value, those become the building blocks of continuous innovation. Okay, I think that works. So how can we maybe make that a little more explicit? Well, let's think about people and process and how they work together. Here you see some balance, scales. Now, I'm sure many of you along the way, depending on when you encountered lean, someone said to you, lean is all about process. And we love to do process thinking. We're chasing the perfect process. And you get infected by the process improvement bug, right? And you go around everywhere you go to the coffee shop, you go to the airport, and you see all these things that are just horrendous in terms of the way it works, and you want to go out there and fix it. And that is a lot of the excitement. That's the kind of the fun part of lean. And those of you who have not had that experience of wanting to do that, I encourage you to do that. This is we can be geeks about this whole lean thing. There's a lot of fun little tools and techniques and all that. It's really a lot of fun. So I'm sure you've heard lean is all about process. Lean means process. And depending on when you encountered the word lean, someone probably said lean's all about people. Lean is all about people. And I'm sure you've heard someone else then say at the end of a conversation, lean's all about leadership. It's all about leadership. And so you hear that, and every time someone says it's all about process, it's all about people, it's all about leadership, every time it seems like, yeah, it makes sense. But then you start to put it together and say, wait a minute, this isn't exactly maybe making sense. So if it's all about people, I know companies that absolutely approach this or any kind of improvement in terms of it's all about people. People are wonderful, and we need to unleash the creativity that is inherent in every human being. So just let them go. Stop this oppression of the organization, the bureaucracy that holds people down. Let them go, and things will be good. A lot of companies like that, and I know many companies like that cannot find a way to make a decision to get through the day, much less try to actually transform themselves. I know other companies that are like this, that are heavy on the process side or the technical side. That's another way to think about processing people would be social and technical. Social, technical system, research and thinking has been around for a long time, since probably the 60s. It makes sense, but then how do we do this? You see a lot of companies heavily weighted on the technical side. I know a company in Silicon Valley in the United States that every single person in the company is an engineer. The HR manager is an engineer. The accountants actually are also engineers. It's amazing. You talk to them about being a people company, they look at you like, what does that mean? Right? And you see companies then that go back and forth like this, right? You kind of go back and forth. Whereas I think one of the things that's important about lean is it's bringing those into balance, not just one. So lean is about embodying, I think, the art and craft of science. We love science. And we think of science as just a matter of mathematics, numbers. But actually there's an art to it and there's a craft to it. So again, I would encourage you to master the craft of lean. It's just a lot of fun. A lot of little things in there about how you actually learn about Kanban algorithms and Heijunka and things like that. It's a lot of fun. And I would encourage you to do that. There's a craft to it. And science will give us a technical answer to just about any problem we can think of, right? Turn it into a math problem if you wish. But if we've worked in organizations any time at all, which everyone here has, we know that science, with it being technically right, is only half the answer. So this is where a lot of my engineer friends just have a bit of frustration in their working careers, because they'll think, well, I've got the right answer. That should carry the day. Here, I gave them the right answer. If they don't get it, fine. They just go back to the cubicle. But that is not enough, right, to bring about this change. So somehow or another, we have to have leadership involved in balancing people and process, the social and the technical. And to be able to do that, we have to have some aim. Any system has to have an aim. Deming told us this many years ago. A system without an aim is not really a system. So, and we call that purpose. I'm going to use the word purpose and aim roughly interchangeably. So this topic of lean transformation, this is what we want. We want our organizations to be something better than they are today. Sometimes that's fundamental. Dan mentioned a kaikaku. So I'm going to give have something of a definition that we can use to have a dialogue. So enterprise transformation, any enterprise transformation, forget lean for a minute, is the process of an organization shifting its business model to a desired future state. Here's where we are. We need to be something better, and let's shift that. And I put the word business in quotes because business, I mean whatever the objective of that organization is. So a school, so an agency, so something that's not necessarily a business. I think the same thing applies. But a lean transformation then is a specific kind of transformation. It has its own color, has its own it has its own character. And it requires learning a new way of thinking and acting. Not just the change, but a new way of thinking and acting that goes along with that. And that way of thinking and acting is characterized not by implementing a series of steps or solutions, but by addressing key questions of purpose, process, and people. So I guess if back to the quote that I used from Paul ONeill to start off, if there's something that could be useful as we will all leave here today, I think this was one piece, that it's not a 10-step, a 12-step program that's going to make you lean. It's not a series of steps or solutions, but addressing key questions. So I'm going to introduce a very difficult English word here. It's difficult for us, at least American English speakers. I don't know about you, Prez. Do you use this word? Do you learn this word like in public school or something? You do?
Only a few. Only a few.
Only a few. Well, I never encountered this word, I don't know, probably the 80s or 90s, and it's a very difficult word. But if you Google it, you'll find something like this. It's enabling a person to discover or learn something for themselves. It's a hands-on or interactive heuristic approach to learning is the way to think of it. So what we've put together then with our lean transformation framework that we originally called model is a set of questions that we can use that could provide kind of guidepost, a GPS. So it's not a roadmap. A roadmap is useful if you're going to follow the exact path someone else took to go the exact same place they went, right? That's what a roadmap is for. Everyone wants a roadmap. A roadmap is good in that case, but in fact, every journey is going to have to be different. I'm sorry to say that. It is indeed situational. But if you just say situational and leave it there, it can evolve into something that's ad hoc. No, that's not the case either. We have some thinking that can help guide us. So we put together this lean transformation framework, And what I'd like to do now is share with you an animation that shows that. So I'll ask my friends over here to play the animation now. Here at the Lean Enterprise Institute, we think a lot about change. We think a lot about enterprise transformation. Every day, all day, each of us aspires to create desired change. That's what work is all about. Enterprise transformation, then, is change on the enterprise level. We've learned a lot over the years, and we have learned that effective enterprise transformation requires change, innovative improvement on 5 dimensions. That is a bold assertion. Not 4, not 6, but 5 dimensions. And lean thinking has a point of view about each of those 5 dimensions. We're not going to go deeply into what those points of view are right now. What we will do is explore the essential matter of how to think about enterprise change through the illustration of a house. The metaphor of a house has been around lean thinking for a long time, so we'll use that for convenience. Let's start with the roof to explore it. Any good house has to have a roof to protect us from the rain, sleet, and maybe excessive sunshine, if there could be such a thing. At the top of this house, we're going to have our objectives, our goals, our aspirations. In other words, we're going to be asking a question, which is, what is our value-driven purpose? Why are we here as a company, as an enterprise? It may be that we think we're here just to generate money. That would take us down a certain path, in which case I may care less about value and may care just about profit. Lean thinking drives us to think about what value are we creating for customers, for society, for employees. What is our value-driven purpose? Since it starts with a question like that, that means our approach to effective transformation is going to be situational. It's a situational approach determined by first asking the question, what is our value-driven purpose? And more specifically, each individual in your organization needs to be able to ask and answer, what problem am I here to solve? What problems are we each trying to solve? The next question to ask is, what is the work to be done? What is the work? Any house has to have walls, or we could say pillars, to hold up the roof. This first pillar represents the work to be done. We can call it process. What is the process by which we're going to accomplish our purpose? If our purpose is to create videos, then we have to know how to get a video camera, then set it up so that we have the proper lights so we can actually get the work done. Then, as we gain experience, we'll doubtless find that there are problems in the work, that the work needs to be improved. So we need some means by which we go about process improvement, improving the work to be done. Always starting with the work. What is the work to be done? So now that I've identified the work that's going to solve the problem, to deliver the value that we're here to provide, that's the first pillar to hold up the roof. The roof is not going to be held up with only one pillar. We have to have another. And we're going to call this one capability. This pillar is understood by asking the question, what capabilities do we need to do the work, to solve the problem, to fulfill our purpose? Capability building then comprises the other pillar, the second pillar. With these 2 pillars, now I have something holding up my roof, so it starts to look like a house. But any house is only a house until it's a home. It becomes a home by the behavior of the people living in it. The person is inside, not outside, so protected, comforted by the house, but also the dynamic that brings the house to life to make it into a home. There are 2 aspects to that we want to think about here. One is the management system that I can define that will support the development of building capabilities to do the work, to fulfill the purpose. Also, the behaviors, the soft skills that are required of leaders and everyone for us to be able to work effectively in this management system to build the capability to do the work to fulfill the purpose. So we need to define those soft skills, those behaviors. For example, how might I respond as a leader when one of my employees, one of my team members, has a problem or has made a mistake? Do I get angry? Do I throw things? Or do I seek to understand the reason why so I can take away the barriers that are in the way of that employee being successful? The management system, then, is something I can define just as I define a mechanical device. Let's say, for example, we'll meet every morning in a huddle at 8 o'clock. We'll meet again before lunch to see how the day has gone so far. We'll have weekly meetings to really assess and determine our plans for the week. We'll meet monthly to see how we're doing against our annual plan, and annually, we'll develop a plan that will take our organization further towards achieving our defined purpose. This then is something that can be defined mechanically, the management system, and then the behaviors, the leader behaviors and the teamwork behaviors of everyone are those soft skills that fit in and bring this overall system to life. And one more dimension to our enterprise transformation model, and that is underneath all of this, there's a basic thinking, a mindset or underlying assumptions that inform everything we do, that inform all of our activities as we attempt to achieve our purpose. Basic thinking, and a couple of other words that I'll use interchangeably here with basic thinking, mindset or underlying assumptions. Assumptions can be of two types really, explicit assumptions that we articulate and hidden underlying assumptions that we're not aware of on a moment-to-moment basis. These are the underlying assumptions that comprise our culture, our current culture as it exists today, and our ideal culture that we aspire to. Understanding that will give us a gap to close, just as we will be able to identify gaps in other parts of our enterprise performance as we solve problems day to day. So altogether, these are things that need to be addressed, and around each of these I can ask some simple questions. What problem are we trying to solve? What purpose are we trying to achieve? What is the work to be done? How will I go about improving it? What capabilities are required, and how will I grow them? What management system can I define? And what behaviors are required to build the capabilities, to do the work, to solve the problem that we're here to solve. And underneath it all is the matter of addressing what is our basic thinking. What do we currently think, for example, about cause and effect? How is that thinking currently comprised in our culture, and how does that affect the kind of culture that we want to create? These dimensions addressed lead us toward effective enterprise transformation. If we leave any of these out, we'll fail. So the lean transformation model is a situational approach because there is no perfect. So there you go. Sorry about the narration. Probably should hire a professional who has a better voice. So how many of you have seen that before? Just curious. A good number of people. What we find is people tell us that it's useful or helpful or necessary to watch it a couple of times and to really think it through. Ultimately, it's a framework for any of us to use to think about our situation, any organization that we're working with, and even to think about ourselves. I don't know if borrowing the house metaphor helps or hurts. That's not the point. The point really is the questions. There are 5 dimensions of questions and a couple of sub-questions in a couple of those. But the house seemed to kind of work, and why is that? First of all, I'm going to start at the bottom there. We kind of reverse engineered or borrowed the Toyota House framework. Right? It's something that the TPS House has been around for a long time. Almost everyone in lean world knows it. But really it came from reflecting on failure modes over the years of observing companies. When something goes wrong with either some Kaizen that you did or some activity or a broader effort, if you look back, you will find the failure mode somewhere in those 5 pieces. There was something in one of those 5 that was lacking. Leadership engagement may not have been there. Leadership engagement may have been there, but we didn't actually change the work. Or we were changing work, but not developing the people to appropriately to now be able to effectively work with the work that we changed and did a change to them. We were doing a lot of stuff that was great, but what purpose for what purpose? What problem were we trying to solve? A mismatch between what was felt in terms of the operations and what they thought was a problem versus what we were bringing in as a solution. And sometimes all that may work fairly well, but then at the bottom, there's just a different thinking of what this is trying to achieve, lean transformation, versus what the company is really trying to achieve. And for example, if I look back on some of the difficulties of General Motors and learning this over the years, it probably lies somewhere there. A lot of people say, why didn't GM learn this? Why didn't GM learn? You go into good GM factories, they're darn good now. They learned a lot, actually. There are a lot of people inside GM who get it, so to speak. But there may be a bit of a mismatch between the very purpose of the organization. Don't know. Another thing was actually, I've had the opportunity, I'm a very lucky man. I went to Japan the first time in 1977, started working for Toyota there in 1983. 1983, when this opportunity or challenge came along for Toyota to make this joint venture with General Motors, For a time there, I was the only American in Toyota City working on an assembly line to learn how this works, because it's all learning through hands-on, right? You learn through doing. So it's a great opportunity. So I've had a chance to work with a lot of these sensei that Dan talked about, some of the truly master sensei. And if I think through what they were looking for as we would visit companies, visit operations, it's these things. They're making sure that is a problem here clear. What do we need to work on? What's the objective of this factory, of this company? You start there. And anything, do they know how to do it? If they're putting together clickers, do they know the process of putting together a clicker in a way that gives perfect quality every time? Then, are they developing the people so they can really do that and improve that and solve problems along the way? And then we'll take a look at what the management system and the leaders are doing, and then you'll look for this connection between the basic thinking of that organization, underlying thinking, and what the company is trying to achieve. So I think a big failure mode that so many have had over the years is we've tried to copy certain solutions, cut and paste. We do that within companies. Well, this factory is doing something great in terms of how they put on bumpers, or how they have engineers, go about now working with their different design software. So we're just going to have that pasted everywhere throughout the company. At a bigger level, what we see is so many companies have tried to copy Toyota solutions. But Toyota's told us, my own sensei or teachers reminded me almost daily, look, this TPS thing, that's just something with the house. That's just something we came up with in the early 70s to try to describe what we had done along the course of developing solutions to our problems. So what we really needed to do was not copy their solutions, but reverse engineer that to see what questions they were asking. So this is what this framework is an attempt to reverse engineer that, see what questions were being asked. So that's what we have now. So we have this house. I'd like to very briefly, just something that most of our effort is going to be here in the middle. Okay, in the middle. Not the roof, not the foundation, most here in the middle. Which is working on the work, to change the work, to make it better, to make it more efficient, more productive, better quality. Developing people so they can do that, and also to do continuous improvement. We all want these cultures of continuous improvement. And then the management system and leaders that can enable that to happen. So leaders that work with a management system to develop people to do the work to accomplish the mission. That's where we're going to spend most of our attention, right here in the middle. But for today, let's take a look really just at the top and the bottom, and a little bit about how to connect those two, starting here at the top. So what about purpose, and what about the problem we need to address? First of all, what is a problem? What that says at the top, if you can see it there, should be where you want to be, I think. And what it says at the bottom should be where we are. So the word problem bothers some people. We have a problem with the word problem, I think, in a lot of ways. It's a scary thing, and not all of us like to be open with our problems. I think maybe most of us don't like to do that. And especially when in our companies, for the most part, we're encouraged to have a solution that's right so we can go fast, as opposed to simply understand and analyze problems. So the word gap may be a good one. It's a gap between where I am and where I need to be. And it's a fractal thing. This is very important. So all the way from the very top of the house, from the CEO and the board and the company's very purpose, all the way down to the frontline work. It is connecting everything all the way through. It's a fractal. The same 5 questions apply, whether I'm thinking about the massive company, however big it may be, General Motors, a massive company, or down to a singularity. What you'd like to see right there at the point of work is a singularity where all these things are coming together in harmony. That's what we would like to see. It makes us think again, okay? Originally we called this a lean transformation model, and didn't intend it to be taken as a model to do. It was a heuristic model, a framework. So we rebranded it kind of as a framework, because this is so important. Which is more critical, solutions or questions? And I think as we think about making the world a better place, it has to be questions. It has to be. But where do we spend so much of our time in our companies is focused on getting that solution fast. And you get a good solution that seems to work well here. Let's turn that into a best practice, and let's plaster that everywhere. This is kind of the way the world usually works. But what is more important? It has to be questions. Just a couple of examples I like to use to illustrate this. You could find many great thinkers and scientists over the years who have told us this, but here's an anthropologist named Claude Lévi-Strauss. The scientific mind does not so much provide the right answers as ask the right questions. I think that has to be true. It has to be true if we're going to try to think scientifically. And you can tell whether a man is clever by his answers. You can tell whether a man is wise by his questions. I think that's also true, and even a bit inspirational. And here's an example from the business, to bring it a little closer to home. We started with that fundamental question. This is a quote from the CEO of a company that I'm very interested in, but never visited, called Lego. I think we have a member here or two from Lego. In fact, I've never visited Lego. It may not be such a great company, but everything I know about it says it's a really interesting and great company. But I also know, just from watching a lot of YouTube videos and reading and talking to people, that it underwent a transformation starting 10 or 12 years ago, whereas the company had been in a tailspin. Things were not going well. And so a new CEO came in to try to revive and try to recreate. And he started with this fundamental question: why does Lego exist? I think it's wonderful to do that. Now, I'm not encouraging us to go back to work Monday and start asking everyone around us, why do we exist? But honestly, we need to start with this question, that then we could connect everything that we do to that. Lego is such an amazing company. Again, the product that they make. What's interesting in this case, and some other cases that I like, that I find instructive, is that they didn't change the fundamental nature of what they do. They still make these little plastic blocks. That's all they do. That's all we were 30 years ago. That's all they do now. But still, they had found themselves adrift in terms of connecting their activities to their essential purpose. So, the top, we're going to look at the bottom in a minute. One of the things that connects those is this question number 4. What management system and leadership behaviors are required to support this new way of working? We have some sub-questions that make each of those a little more tangible, I suppose. In this case, it's have we designed the management system, and do our leaders exhibit the needed behaviors? The needed behaviors to develop capability, to do the work, for us to achieve the mission, to achieve our purpose. So question number 4, just to take a look at just for a minute, there in the middle. In the middle. See the leaper there, kind of burdened. One of the things I'd encourage all of us to think about, Dan took us through a great history, I think, of looking at issues, failure modes that he's seen and successes over the years. One of the things I find is that people are pretty ad hoc in terms of what they grab to try to bring about their transformation. I would like to encourage us to be a little bit more thoughtful, be very deliberate in what our approach is going to be. So it's situational. I'm not going to say there's just one approach you must follow, but what you'll find is companies just kind of grabbing whatever is in front of them, whatever is recommended to them by someone they know or a consultant. So you could approach your transformation through broad-based training. If we were all in a company of 200 of us here, we could say we're going to train everybody. We're going to train everybody in Lean, train everyone in TPM. And we have a lot of machines out there, so everyone learns TPM, so they're going to go do TPM on each machine. That's one way to go about this. Another, of course, is to say, well, what problems do our machines have, and which ones need TPM and which don't, and what should that look like? It's a very different approach, asking what's the problem to solve versus blasting out with some lean solution, by the way. But broad-based training is one thing that companies do. Hire from the outside. We don't have that knowledge inside. I want to do it. I want to have DIY, do it ourselves, so I can hire some great experts. A lot of people advocate, and one way to go about this, if I'm a CEO, is have a top-down mandate. I can mandate everyone is going to do this. Again, we're all going to go through training, and everyone will do Lean. I'm not going to approve any requisition unless it's accompanied by an A3. I can mandate this from the top. We can require common systems and practices everywhere. I have 10 factories. I don't want to go in this factory and it looks one way, and that factory it looks another way. I want them all to look the same. I want standardized work everywhere. Kaizen workshops, or the Kaikaku workshops, Kaizen rapid improvement events. We can decide that's going to be our way forward, and we do 100 this year. That wasn't enough. Let's do 500 next year. That is one approach. Model site projects, where you go very, very deep before you go broad. These are all methods and approaches that may be appropriate in different situations, but instead of a grab bag, let's think through which approach we want to use in our case, and by making that decision, I can make that transformation effort itself into an experiment that I can learn from. So how would you go about deciding which approach to use? A number of things to consider. I'm just going to throw up one, I think, maybe one or two here right now. One is top management. Again, everyone says this is not going to work unless the CEO is on board, unless top management is driving this. This is a very common statement that a lot of my friends make. Well, if I'm going to start thinking about a transformation in company X, Y, Z, I'm simply going to ask the question, what is the stance of my top management now today? And honestly, they're not all going to be like Art Byrne, the example that Dan mentioned earlier. And I don't want to put myself in a situation of wishing that Art Byrne would come be the CEO of my company. So what can I do? I want to understand what the top management stance is. It may be that they lead it, which many people in the lean business will say it must be senior leader, it must be CEO-led. Maybe that the senior leader is supportive, whatever that may be, provide resources, say the right things at the right time. It may be that the senior leaders are negative, in which case you do indeed have a problem. That is going to be a problem that you'll need to deal with as you develop your strategy, your approach for bringing about your transformation. Or it may be that your CEO, and even most of the C-suite, is really quite indifferent. You're out there, you're bringing about a 10 or 15 or 20% improvement in productivity, quality getting better, and they just say, do more of that, please. They don't really care. They're quite indifferent. And I would suggest that actually that may not be such a bad place, that a benign indifference isn't always such a bad thing. Sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for, and wanting your CEO to lead this can lead to a lot of trouble. CEOs, by their nature and by the fact they've been developed themselves for 30 years and to take action and make decisions and be decisive, and yet their lean knowledge is going to be probably very small. Their grasp of true deep lean thinking is probably not going to be all that deep. So you may not want them leading this, actually. You may need them to be supportive, and you'll need to deal with it if they're negative, but even a benign indifference may not be so bad, unless you happen to have a CEO like Art Byrne or Paul ONeill. The Paul ONeill story, I don't know how many of you know it. If you don't, you really should. It's a great success story, a tremendous success story. Paul ONeill later became the U.S. Secretary of Treasury in the United States, so a very well-known man. Still very active. I think he's about 80 years old, but still very active and actually bringing lean to healthcare, his passion. He's in, as you see there, the Manufacturing Hall of Fame. Paul personally learned and led the introduction of the Alcoa business system, which was based directly on the Toyota production system. He hired some of my friends, some very excellent people from Toyota to actually help design and lead this. An intentional effort led by Paul. Now, he pursued growth by improving the work, speed of machines, amount of energy used, the number of people needed per task, waste material generated, length and time of processes. These very specific changes in the work, even though he was the CEE of a mammoth, gigantic global organization. When he took over as CEO of Alcoa, I think it was very late 80s, first thing that happened, because it's a publicly owned company, so the first thing that happened is he had a presentation on Wall Street to the analysts and large investors. And I just had a big room about like this, and everyone's there taking notes. What's Paul ONeill going to do to, increase shareholder value, to raise the stock price, to make this, And he stood up and said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make Alcoa the safest company in the world. And the room emptied out. All the analysts ran to their phone to tell people to sell Alcoa stock. And then, as he said safety, he put teeth to that. He put something real to it. He said, these are his words, go back years ago. I intend to go for 0 injuries. Until I said the target was 0, we didn't have a problem. Now, this was before the transformation framework. He knew he had to make a clear problem that the organization could understand. So part of the role of leadership is to create a crisis. In fact, Jim and Dan have told us for years, you need a crisis. Certainly you need some sense of urgency. If you have it or don't, it's going to be a big factor in your success and certainly your speed of success. But I intend to go for 0. Until I said the target was 0, we didn't have a problem. Now, this is Alcoa. They do aluminum. This is huge processing stuff. This is dangerous stuff. So within their type of industry, their safety record wasn't so bad, but it wasn't stellar. And on the global scale of industry safety, it was pretty bad. So as we're going to go for 0 injuries, of course, his management team, now he said this to the management team, and they wanted to leave the room, but they couldn't. And he made it clear exactly how he was going to make this happen. I don't think I put this here. But what he said was he wanted to know any accident that resulted in any lost time. He wanted to know about that within 48 hours as a CEO of a giant organization. Pretty amazing thing. It may or may not sound dramatic to you, but in an organization that large, that many giant factories around the globe, I want to know as a CEO any lost time accident within 48 hours. He knew that was going to require a new communication channels to be created. He knew that was going to be something very specific that frontline people, frontline supervisors, managers, plant managers, business unit leaders then would have to think about how to make that happen. Along the way, by the way, there was a totally understandable lapse in the system where the business unit president at one of the global business units in Latin America, there was a lost time accident. And for understandable reasons, word of that did not get through to Paul in time. And he was an exemplary leader, the president of that business unit, and Paul fired him. It was kind of, I don't know if that was the thing I would advocate or not, but it is sent a clear message to the organization. I have told people what I'm going to do if this doesn't happen, and so I have to do it, and so he fired the guy. There were other examples of how he brought this to bear in very specific ways, not just high level, lofty, we're going to be safe, we're going to be lean, something like that. He made it real, made it into a crisis. And here's something else that Paul said years ago, before all the recent, hubbub about, habits and things like that. He said, you can't order people to change. That's not how the brain works. I don't think he's a neuroscientist. If I could start disrupting the habits around one thing, it would spread throughout the company. So here's what happened then over in, by the mid-90s, like 94 or so. Net income grew 5 times. Market cap grew 27 billion. It became the safest company in his industry and one of the safest companies in the world. An amazing, amazing turnaround. He also said, we're going to have excellence in everything we do. Even something, he chose something as mundane as closing, how to close the monthly books. And they reduced the close time from 6 months. When he looked at it, he said, 6 months, why even bother? The only one that would care after 6 months is a historian. That's not going to be helpful to us in any possible way. To 2.5 days. And that 2.5 day reduction actually still exists. They still close in 2.5 days. Injury rate reduced by 50% by 1991. This is after just a couple of years. And by 2000, it was 5 times safer than it was 10 years earlier by changing people's habits. Now, I always hesitate to give these stories of these iconic leaders because one of the things lean is, if here in the UK, it's a no wine zone, W-I-N-E. Lean is a no wine zone, W-H-I-N-E. It's no whining. We see people, it's sad to see people waste so much time in years of their career wishing they had a different boss. If my boss was Paul ONeill, Art Byrne, then that'd be great. Life would be good. I could do lean comfortably. No, we can't wait for this leader on the white horse to come along and say it's all about the leader. It's actually got to be about us. It's do it yourself at the organizational level, Dan, as you were explaining, and also at the individual. It just has to be at the end of the day. So that gets into these questions of what is our basic thinking. That's what Paul was getting at with his leadership behavior. He wanted to save company, but he also wanted to change the thinking of everyone there. So this means asking, what is our basic thinking, mindset, assumptions that underlie the transformation? Well, for a hint of what might be indicative of how much we need to think about the kind of system we're creating in our companies, another lesson, I guess, or at least something to look at from Toyota, not advocating copying what they say or what they do, but this is how much thought they were putting in decades ago into the manufacturing system that they were creating when they created TPS. Mr. Mino Ura happens to be one of my favorite teachers, sensei, back in Toyota. And he's the one who first coined this term, thinking production system. Toyota production system, and TPS, he says TPS is good, but we really should call it a thinking production system, and anyone can do it. Anyone can do it, not just Toyota. If some problem occurs in one-piece flow manufacturing, then the whole production line stops. In this sense, it's a very bad system of manufacturing. Production is stopping. My goodness, we can't be able to build cars. But when production stops, everyone is forced to solve the problem immediately. So team members have to think, and through thinking, team members grow and become better team members and people. I think that's just awesome. And what's awesome is not the fact, okay, he said that, therefore Toyota's great, rah, rah, rah. That's not what I mean at all. The fact that the leaders who are developing the manufacturing system, right, the mechanics of that, were thinking about this at the same time, just like Paul ONeill at a different level. So lean thinking means then, we have this principle of just enough, no excess, no waste. We like to call it focus on value, but a practice of questioning and investigating. So if the optimist says the glass is half full, the pessimist says it's half empty, what we want to say is, I don't know if it's too big. I don't know if the glass is too big or there's not enough water in it. I don't know. How can I find out? What experiment could I run? And then for us as leaders, then we need to be encouraging that kind of thinking in ourselves and amongst others. So that gets us around to this thing that Dan mentioned, which is that if basic thinking underlies here at the bottom in this little pyramid, and at the top, these are the things we do, the artifacts, the things we do, what we do every day, how we behave, how we act, then I used to think that what you needed to do was change the culture first. That's why I went to Japan. When I joined Toyota, that's what I was looking for, a cultural answer to things. But what I've learned is probably it's more useful to it. The question, one of the things, as lean thinkers, we're empirical and we're practical. What is useful? What is useful to make things better? That's all. And it's easier then to act your way to a new way of thinking than to think your way to a new way of acting. That's a dichotomy put up there. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but I think mainly it's a matter of how we can think our way to a new way of acting. Again, as I said before, the heavy lifting here is here in the middle. And I don't want to leave that message out. It's here in the middle. That's where you'll spend your time. Because this is where it all comes together. This is where it comes together. So what you see here, and I show this little slide a lot. So for years, I could put up this one slide and talk all day, have a conversation all day. Well, what's going on there? At the high level, what's going on, if lean production was introduced to us 25 years ago, the assembly line was given to us 100 years ago, 102 years ago. And if you look at a Toyota assembly line, at one level, it looks the same thing, the same way that a Henry Ford assembly line looked 100 years ago. Almost the same. You have a flowing line there, moving conveyor line, and you have a car, and you have people, first you stamp it, you weld it together, you paint it, and you stuff it with the stuff. And that looks almost the same. And it takes about a minute to make a car. That really hasn't changed in 100 years. And you look at photographs that show people getting in and out of cars and working on them. It hasn't changed that much. But if you look at this more closely, what you'll see is a carefully designed social and technical system. What is different from what Henry Ford did is the way you can see the worker there having a problem, the worker finding a problem, knowing that he or she had a problem, knowing exactly what to do once you found a problem, which is to notify, pull the rope, knowing what's going to happen after you've asked for help, which is someone's going to help you within your job cycle. And the way they're going to help you is solving that problem right now to get the line running again, but more importantly, to go through a problem-solving exercise with you so that we are reinforcing and learning problem-solving together. So that is a powerful thing. That's an ecosystem that's being designed right there. So we all know about design of experiment, DOE, design of experiment. We need to be thinking about design of work experience so that we design work experiences that bring about this way of thinking that we think can make the world a better place. So this is a way that this is the way that can look in any kind of work. You don't have to have an assembly line to make this work. It can look something like this, where you have people doing their work. They have a target of where they need to be, and they're not there, right? I want to be 0 injuries. I want to have everything working perfectly in terms of quality. Okay, my current is not there. They don't equal. As people do their work, then they can be looking for those kinds of problems, which is anything that gets in the way of their standard work. Then they can know exactly what to do, which is call for help. Help is going to come, and together you'll figure out what the problem is. You will work on that and put in place a countermeasure, and you'll keep going around this. You could call this a kind of a kata, if you will. It's a way of making things better. It's a way of working that we can do anywhere. And we have a lot of lean tools that reinforce or support this kind of thing. So we have standardized work there, where you see someone going through a work sequence of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They know exactly how much time they have to do the work, tack time and a cycle time. And anything that gets in the way of being able to do that successfully, well, that's a problem. And I may be able to solve it together, or I may need to ask for help, and help can come right away. The A3 is a similar process that we can use more for knowledge work, so we can get the thinking that each person has about how they're approaching the problem, how they want to make things better. We can put that down on a sheet of paper so we can talk about it and understand it together. This is where the cultural change happens, is these kind of very specific things like this. If I look back at what happened at NUMMI and how that culture changed in 1 year from the worst workforce, people who sabotage quality, to the very best, this is what changed it. It wasn't that we had now we had new HR slogans that our people are our most important resource. It's because we embodied that in the way the work was designed, and we actually supported that, reinforced that, and followed up on that to actually make it so. So it comes down to how we think about the work, the frontline work of each person. What the NUMMI experience taught me is that people want to do good work. Everyone in the world, I'm going to say, doesn't want to be bad at their job. Now, you may say, no, I've met people who want that. There may be one person in your career that you find that really doesn't want that. But I'm going to say no one goes to work and wants to suck. They don't. They want to go to work and be successful. So then our job becomes how to give them the environment, the capability whereby they can be successful. And that's what these things do, no matter what level, what job that they may have in the company. They may be a frontline worker, they may be a receptionist, they may be a janitor, but what they're doing is important and critical, and they have a right to be the best, most knowledgeable person in the company regarding their piece of work. It means elevating the respect that we give to that work. That's what brings about the real change. All these other things are part of that, but that's the key point. It's not just leadership, it's not just process, it's all these things together, and it's going to be embodied in a singularity in how someone does their work, whether they're an engineer or they're a factory worker, or, to quote Martin Luther King, I have trouble reading this because I actually get emotional when I read it, so I'll try. If a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets even as a Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well. I'm not kidding, I do have a hard time reading this. It actually makes me emotional because people do work all day, every day. Sometimes it's dangerous, sometimes it causes them frustration, sometimes it elevates them to places they didn't think they could go, and this is what we want. So all the host of heaven and earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper, a designer, a factory worker, a janitor, who did his job well. So I hope you've given you a few ideas you can act on. I'll quote Paul ONeill again to end my talk. Thank you very much, and let's have a great couple of days together.